Mike was still on TV, still fixing cars, still living his dream. How did a man who lost his empire somehow keep his show alive? The answer reveals a secret most viewers never suspected about what really happened. Mike Hall was born on February 4, 1958, in Street, Boniface, a part of Winnipeg, Manitoba. When he was still a young boy, his father got a job working for the Canadian Pacific Railway, and the whole family moved west to Kamloops, British Columbia. That move changed everything for Mike. Life in the interior of British Columbia gave him room to roam and plenty of space to explore back roads and open fields. It didn't take long before one thing completely took over his world: cars. Not shiny new ones, but old rusted-out wrecks sitting forgotten in fields and behind barns. By the early 1970s, when he was just a teenager, Mike had already started sneaking into people's backyards and scouting old country roads, looking for dead cars that he could bring back to life. While most kids were saving up for records or bikes, Mike was dragging home junkers that no one else wanted. He didn't see rust. He saw potential. A beat-up 50s coupe or a rotting pickup wasn't trash to him. It was a puzzle waiting to be solved. Some of his friends thought it was weird. Neighbors gave him odd looks, but he didn't care. He was already collecting car after car, storing them wherever he could. At a time when other kids were figuring out what they wanted to be, Mike already knew he wanted to fix things with wheels. By the time he hit his 20s in the late 1970s, Mike had gathered dozens of vintage cars. He hadn't gone to trade school. There weren't any fancy certificates on his wall. What he had was real-world experience. He'd taught himself everything: how to rebuild engines, how to shape metal, how to bring a car back from the dead. Every wreck he brought home turned into a lesson. Every engine that wouldn't start became a challenge. And slowly, all that trial and error turned into skill. The kind of skill that didn't come from a classroom. It came from busted knuckles and long nights in freezing sheds. Mike Hall didn't grow up thinking he'd end up owning hundreds of old cars. But his obsession with rust and engines didn't come out of nowhere. In the 1980s, long before the cameras showed up, he was already climbing cliffs and blowing apart mountain sides to make a living. That's where his real career began. He started a company called Chimera Springs Rockworks. And it wasn't your average construction gig. Mike wasn't pouring concrete or laying bricks. He was drilling into cliff faces, hanging off ropes, and setting off controlled explosions. This was dangerous, exhausting work that most people wouldn't dare to do. But Mike thrived on the adrenaline. It was during those years that people started calling him the Rasta Blasta, because of his long, dreadlocked hair and his explosive day job. The nickname stuck and followed him for the rest of his life. Through the 1980s and 1990s, and even into the 2000s, he stayed in that business. He became known in British Columbia for his blasting work, and he made good money doing it. But he wasn't saving it. He was spending almost all of it on junk cars, and not just one or two here and there. He had a hunger for forgotten vehicles. It didn't matter if they were full of rust or missing half their parts. If Mike thought the car had a soul or a story, he wanted it. And if it needed saving, that only made him want it more. He wasn't buying shiny restored classics. He was hunting for rust buckets that had been left behind. Over the next few decades, his property started filling up with vehicles from all over the map. Some of them were rare muscle cars from the 1960s. Others were beat-up pickup trucks or old European sports cars that hadn't run in years. Every time he blasted rock for a job and got paid, he'd use that money to bring another broken-down machine home. By the time the 2010s rolled around, people started asking how many cars he actually owned. The number was unbelievable. Over 400 vehicles were sitting on his land. And it wasn't just a collection. It was a landscape of rust and metal that stretched as far as you could see. He used to joke that he didn't collect cars, he collected rust. That's where the name Rust Bros came from. The guys who worked with him weren't just mechanics or laborers. They were part of the same strange mission. Mike wasn't trying to flip cars for profit or build a showroom. He was trying to rescue machines that other people had forgotten. Even if they never got restored, just saving them from the scrapyard felt like a win. And while outsiders didn't always understand it, there was something about the way Mike talked about those cars that made it clear it wasn't just a hobby. It was something deeper. He once said he couldn't walk away from a car that needed saving. He felt drawn to them, and every explosion he set off during the day was just one more step toward being able to afford another piece of rolling history at night. Mike Hall never really tried to become a public figure. Long before he ever appeared on TV, he was already living a very different kind of life out in the Schwab area of British Columbia. He had quietly settled down on a farm there, somewhere peaceful and away from all the noise. He got married, though he never shared his wife's name with the public. They raised a family together, including their son, Connor Charman Hall, who was born in the 1980s. Mike also had a little dog named Minnie, who quickly became another part of the family. But even though the farm was quiet, Mike himself was anything but. His obsession with cars didn't stop just because he had a wife and kid. In fact, it caused a bit of trouble at home. His wife had to lay down a rule: no more junk cars on their property. Their farm was 26 acres, and she didn't want it turning into another rust-filled graveyard. But Mike didn't argue. He simply found another place to chase his dream. He bought a separate 5-acre lot in the nearby town of Tappan, not far from Shuswap Lake. It was just off the Trans-Canada Highway, and it became something legendary. That place turned into what people would later call Mike's Field of Dreams. It was just a sunburnt piece of land filled with hundreds of rusting old cars stretching out as far as you could see. Some were from the 1940s, some from the 1970s. Others were completely stripped down or buried in grass. But to Mike, every single one of them still had life left in it. He didn't see rust. He saw potential. Through the 2000s, Mike's life moved between two extremes. During the day, he worked his main job, blasting rocks as part of a highway construction crew. But at night, he transformed. He would head to his junkyard, working alone like a mad scientist, trying to breathe life back into forgotten metal. He didn't care if no one was watching. He wasn't doing it for fame. He did it because he loved it. But fate had other plans. In 2016, something unexpected happened. Mike was working in the mountains of British Columbia when a major rock slide blocked a highway. The cleanup crew needed help, and fast, so they called in Mike Hall. And when he arrived with his gear and experience, something wild happened. The Discovery Channel crew was filming a documentary called Highway Through Hell, and they decided to include Mike in one of the episodes. That's when the world got its first real look at him. Wearing a hard hat and scaling cliffs like it was nothing, Mike walked up to a mountain of boulders and set his charges. He used his famous Rasta Blasta dynamite system to break the rocks apart and clear the road. It was just a cameo, a few minutes on screen, but it was enough. His fearless attitude, his crazy hair, and his wild energy made people stop and take notice. By the time Mike Hall hit his late 50s, his quiet corner of Tappan, British Columbia, had turned into something most people couldn't believe unless they saw it with their own eyes. Spread across acres of land were more than 500 rusted-out cars. Some were sinking into the dirt. Others were half covered in weeds. But Mike didn't see junk. He saw history. He saw potential. He knew every single car. He could tell you the make, model, and exact year just by glancing at it. One article even said he could describe the features of each of the 562 vehicles scattered around his property. It wasn't a guess. He remembered where he got each one and what it meant to him. Some had been with him for more than 30 years. A few had been sitting there, nearly 40. They weren't just cars. They were his life. But it was becoming too much. The dream that once excited him had quietly started to turn into a burden. Storing over 500 decaying cars wasn't just about space anymore. It cost money. It needed time. It needed energy. And it brought attention. Sometimes the wrong kind. Neighbors got curious. Officials started asking questions. Mike couldn't ignore the signs anymore. His body was slowing down. In 2020, he admitted that age was catching up to him. He said openly that he couldn't possibly restore every car he owned in the years he had left. He'd watched what happened to people who didn't plan ahead. His own father had passed away at just 60, and now Mike was approaching the same number. That thought began to haunt him. He had seen friends and fellow collectors pass away or get sick, leaving behind a mess for their families. And his mind kept coming back to one question. What would happen to his 500 cars if he suddenly wasn't around? He said it out loud once, not to stir drama, but because it was real. What are my wife and kids going to do with 400 cars in a field? It wasn't just a sad thought. It was a warning. One that would shape every decision he made from that point forward. In 2016, Mike Hall looked around his property in Tappan, British Columbia, and realized he might finally be ready to slow down. After decades of collecting old cars, chasing rust, and piling up vintage wrecks, he had gathered more than 300 of them across 5 acres. It was too much. He wanted out. Not a little bit, but all the way. So, he made a bold decision. He put everything up for sale in one giant package. The land, the cars, the rust, the mess, and the madness. The asking price was $1.19 million. To most people, that sounded insane. Who would want a field full of junkers? The ad didn't bring serious offers. Everyone saw it the same way. It wasn't a car collection, it was a scrapyard. Instead of giving up or lowering the price, Mike did something completely unexpected in 2017. He raised the price. He asked for $1.45 million. What happened next shocked even him. The story exploded. A man selling 5 acres and over 300 old cars. People couldn't stop talking about it. Articles were written. News stations picked it up, and the photos of his car-covered property went viral across Canada. Suddenly, Mike wasn't just a local character anymore. He became a national curiosity. Some news outlets even reported that the number of cars might be closer to 500. The property had turned into a legend. Car enthusiasts started calling from across the country with piecemeal offers, trying to buy individual vehicles. But the bigger surprise came when the TV people started calling. One of those people was Tyson Hepburn, a Canadian producer who had worked on Highway Through Hell. He'd met Mike before and remembered the wild property. Now, with the internet buzzing about this eccentric man with hundreds of decaying vehicles and a dream to walk away from it all, the idea of a television series didn't seem far-fetched anymore. Mike had something nobody else did, a real life that looked like fiction. Producers pitched ideas. Some wanted a sensational story about junk and chaos. But Mike made one thing clear. He didn't want to be on TV unless it was about something meaningful. He said the show had to be about fulfilling his dream, not just laughing at his mess. What he really wanted was to restore classic cars with a small team and maybe turn the madness into something beautiful. At 60 years old, Mike Hall didn't slow down or retire quietly. Instead, he opened the gates to his rusty kingdom and let the world in. With the support of Mayhem Entertainment and Cora Studios, he agreed to film a show that would finally force him to do something useful with the hundreds of cars he had spent decades collecting. He built a real workshop right there on his land in Tapen, British Columbia. It was surrounded by mountains of rusted-out classics, and he named it Rust Bros Restorations. The idea behind the show was simple. Take the cars he loved and try to turn them back into gold. Fix them, shine them, and sell them. But anyone who knew Mike also knew this wasn't just a business plan. It was a fight against time, against decay, and against his own deep emotional connection to the very cars he was trying to let go. The show, called Rust Valley Restorers, started filming in 2018. Right from the beginning, Mike brought in his best friend Avery Shea, a heavy equipment mechanic with a beard, big muscles, and even bigger opinions. He was known as the muscle car MacGyver. Mike also brought in his son Connor Charman Hall, a calm, practical young man who always seemed to be cleaning up the financial messes his dad created. Cassidy McCann joined as a body technician, and Sarah Ward handled parts. Together, they were a mismatched crew of car lovers who had one thing in common. They believed in saving cars that the rest of the world had given up on. The show didn't look or feel like the usual big-budget car shows. This wasn't about flashy graphics or dramatic reveals. It was about real people in a small town trying to make a dream work. Rust Valley Restorers premiered on December 6, 2018 on the History Channel in Canada, and people loved it. Viewers couldn't get enough of Mike's wild energy, big heart, and impossible optimism. He didn't look or act like a businessman. He was a 6'6" hippie who said what he felt and spent money like it grew on trees. In one episode, he said, "This shop just about killed me," then admitted he had poured nearly $2 million into the business. He tried to backpedal a little by calling it an investment in his metallic hallucinations, but it was clear he wasn't in it for the money. Connor kept reminding him that they were supposed to be making a profit, but Mike always built the cars too well, spent too much, and then didn't want to let them go. Even when he sold a car, he'd often give a discount just because he liked the buyer. He once said he wanted to make people's dreams come true, even if it meant losing money. And that happened a lot. For the lucky few who got a dream car at a bargain, it was unforgettable. For Rust Bros' bottom line, it was a problem. But viewers didn't care about the numbers. What they saw was heart. And Netflix took notice. In 2019, they picked up the show for international streaming. Suddenly, Rust Valley was famous. Car lovers from all over the world were showing up in Tapen just to see the legendary junkyard and maybe meet the Rust Bros crew. Mike often gave tours himself, still grinning like a kid in a candy store. One of the strongest parts of the show was Mike's relationship with his son. Connor clearly cared deeply for his dad, but often found himself playing the adult. Mike followed emotion. Connor followed logic. And somehow their push and pull created magic. They argued about budgets and time frames, but their bond was solid. In many ways, the show was about more than cars. It was about love, loyalty, and the passing of a dream from one generation to the next. The summer of 2021 was brutal across British Columbia, and Mike's yard full of old cars was like a match waiting to be struck. If even a small grass fire reached his collection, it could destroy everything. That fear, combined with the legal pressure and financial stress, pushed Mike to make a hard decision. He was going to sell. In mid-2021, Mike quietly sold the Tappan property, but the cars weren't included in the deal. That meant he had to move them. So he planned a massive auction with no reserve prices. The date was set for October 20 of 2021. Over 500 cars, many of which hadn't moved in decades, were to be sold in a single day. It felt unreal. 40 years of my life is going to vanish in one day, Mike said. Some of the cars sold for a few hundred. Others went for over $10,000. But Mike didn't focus on the money. He just wanted the cars to go to good homes. He even asked buyers to send him photos if they ever got the cars running again. When the auction ended, all but 50 of the cars were gone. Mike kept about 30 of his favorites, mostly muscle cars and a Dodge convertible. The rest were spread out across Canada and the US. That day hit Mike hard. He said the whole thing was a blur. Watching cars he had owned for 30 or 40 years roll away on trailers left a lump in his throat. But there was relief, too. The yard was finally clear. The zoning problem had quieted down. The massive overhead was gone. And his family, especially his son Connor, was quietly relieved. Mike was 65 when the auction happened. He said it felt like the right thing to do. After the auction, Rust Valley Restorers aired the whole thing as the Season 4 finale in spring 2022. Fans assumed it was the end. Mike had sold his dream. The show looked finished. But behind the scenes, something surprising happened. Instead of walking away, Mike got pulled right back in. After the sale, people started offering him more cars. He joked that after clearing the field, his collection started growing again without him even trying. By 2023, he had close to 200 cars again. He said, "They just find me. One call would come in about an old Buick, another about a Pontiac, and suddenly the cars were back." Even though Season 4 looked like a goodbye, History Channel and Chorus Studios weren't done. Mike hinted in interviews that they had filmed new episodes. He mentioned they had 8 episodes in the can featuring him, Avery, and his son. These were filmed throughout 2022, and they even did winter test drives with cars that had no business being on snow. Fans loved it. So, Season 5 eventually premiered in fall 2024, showing the team adjusting to life after the big sale. They had a new setup, a smaller shop and fewer cars, but the same spirit. Mike worked on a 1968 Shelby GT 350 Mustang and a 1941 Diamond TR, 2 cars that meant a lot to him. One storyline followed a scare where they nearly lost access to a key lot they were using. Another nod to the lingering land issues. But Mike kept pushing forward. He told fans on camera that restoring old cars was in his blood and he wasn't giving up. Off camera, Mike started working with eBay Motors Canada as a brand ambassador. He gave car advice online and showed people how he hunted for parts. Even over Zoom interviews, people said he was still full of life and just as passionate. Letting go of the massive collection gave him space to breathe. Now he could enjoy the work again. Rust Bros Restorations still exists, but now it's leaner and smarter. Mike picks a few projects at a time and focuses on doing them right. He also spends time at car shows and fundraisers around British Columbia. He's become a kind of mentor to young mechanics, sharing what he learned the hard way. His story has inspired others to take risks, follow their passions, and maybe not worry so much about profit. Today, Mike is in his late 60s, still living in the shoe swap with his wife and dog. Connor's still with him, and their bond looks stronger than ever. Mike's wife stays out of the spotlight, but you can imagine she's happy the backyard isn't filled with rusty cars anymore. Mike has also become a kind of grandfather figure to the car community. People look up to him because he built something out of passion, not profit. Rust Valley isn't just a TV show anymore, it's a legacy. And even if Mike never collects 500 cars again, he's still the same guy who can't say no to a rusty fender and a good story.